Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Reading Culture, and to our continuing exploration of Alfred Lord Tennyson's Idylls of the King. So in our previous video, we looked at the first title, the Coming of Arthur. We're going to skip ahead a bit to perhaps one of the more famous parts of the story, involving, namely, Sir Lancelot. So we're going to look ahead at Lancelot and Elaine. Now, this is a particularly interesting story because we are going to really get a complex view of Lancelot, who you could argue is the hero of this particular tale. But what does it even mean in this context? Well, we will see. The story begins rather interestingly. Already into the story, we are introduced to this character of Elaine. We see that she is fantasizing about Lancelot by looking at his shield, which she's guarding. And then there's almost, you could say, akin to a flashback where we see how it was that that shield ended up in her possession. So we see at line 30 that he left it with her, riding out to a joust. And then from lines 34 to 55, we see that he is jousting for a diamond. So at around 61 or so, we see that he has planned to win these annual jousts. They're held every year. For these diamonds come from this crown of this conquered king, and the idea is that he was going to win all of the diamonds by winning the joust every year until he is able to present them all as a bracelet to Queen Guinevere. So the joust is set to be held, right? We see it line 75 to 76, that it's going to be held along the Thames, near modern-day London. However, Lancelot has a plan. So at lines about 73 to 83, we see that he intends to feign injury to avoid the appearance of competing in the joust. We'll get a little bit more information on this a little bit later. And then from lines 97 to 118, we start to get the first sense that there's rumors flying around related to Guinevere and Lancelot, that their love is rumored and perceived by many. However, we see at line 126 to 127 that Arthur does not know of this love, or at least not truly. Right? Guinevere says, "Arthur, my lord, Arthur the faultless king, that passionate perfection, my good lord, but who can gaze upon the sun in heaven? He never spake word of reproach to me, he never had a glimpse of mine untruth. He cares not for me, only here today there gleamed a vague suspicion in his eyes. Some middling rogue has tampered with him, else wrapped in this fancy of his table round, and swearing men to vows impossible, to make them like himself. But friend, to me he is all fault who hath no fault at all. For who loves me must have a touch of earth, the low sun makes the colour. I am yours, not Arthur's, as ye know, save by the bond, and therefore hear my words. Go to the joust, the tiny trumpeting gnat can break our dream when sweetest, and the vermin voices here may buzz so loud we scorn them, but they sting." Right. So this is in the context of her basically saying, if you stay behind, right, with me, right, this is going to increase these rumors, even though we see that this perception of their love is true. And there's a sense that Arthur, in all of his perfection, we looked at this conception of what kind of a king he is conceived of being in the coming of Arthur. He is almost godlike, right? Nearly semi-divine, reflecting the light of the divine Christ. There's this sense that he is almost too good, perhaps, that it causes those around him to realize they can never meet up to that kind of standard. However, we are going to see throughout that Lancelot is presented in some ways as nearly the perfect knight, but of course in other ways considerably not so. All right, so there is this sense that right, these rumors are persisting, and Guinevere ultimately suggests that Lancelot compete in disguise, lest he win merely by force of reputation. He's known as the greatest knight, and there's this sense that by simply coming onto the field in the joust as Lancelot, men will fall before him. Whereas if he were to compete in disguise, he would truly be competing on his own merits alone. And so we see at line 180 to 181 that Lancelot is received by the Lord of Astolat, and Lancelot asks to leave his shield there and borrow another, that he may not be known. For on the shield you would have a sigil of your, your house or what have you, your personal heraldic symbols, and so you would know the knight by his shield, and certainly Lancelot's shield would be known. So he's treading it out for one less known. Now, at lines 210 to 213, we have a significant statement here by the young Lavaine, one of the young knights of this castle, where he says, "For night the maiden," that's his sister Elaine, "dreamt that someone put this diamond in her hand," the diamond that would be one, "and that it was too slippery to be held, and slipped and fell into some pool or stream, the castle well belike." So there's a sense that already there's this harbinger of doom, that Elaine is having a prophetic dream of Guinevere throwing the diamonds into the Thames, as we will see later on. And Guinevere, to put it in context with her, at line 248, she's described as the flower of all the West and of all the world. There's a sense that of all ladies in the world, she is the one to be won, despite the sometimes seeming egregious behavior we're going to see in this story. And Lancelot as well, it's more than simply a casual affair or anything like that. At lines 249 to 252, Lancelot is described as mad, essentially, for love of Guinevere. He's described as being like a fiend. This is line 50. It says, "The mood was often, but in him the mood was often like a fiend, and rose and drove him into wastes and solitudes for agony, who was yet a living soul." Right. So there's the sense that he's just, to describe him like a fiend, that's to describe him really like a demon-possessed man. And his wanderings in the wilderness are a reference to a story in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 8, verse 29, where Jesus Christ heals a man of demon possession, but his demon possession is described as causing him to go out into the wilderness in a very similar way. So there's this sense that Lancelot is possessed by this kind of demon of Eros, almost, you could say. But we're also going to see a similar problem for Elaine. So at line 259, we already get a sense of this, where we see Elaine, that she lifted up her eyes and loved him, that's Lancelot, and with that love, which was her doom. Right, so there's a sense already that she will be doomed by this love as well. All right, so let's pass on a little bit here. We get a series of descriptions of Arthur's conquests. We get a significant little quotation at line 316 where it says that there was no greater leader in terms of Arthur. So remember that this king that is being betrayed throughout the story, he really is supposed to be seen as the best of kings. And what does that say about what is going on with Lancelot and Guinevere? All right, so for the sections, roughly lines 355 to 382, Lancelot agrees to wear Elaine's favor. So a favor would be a piece of cloth, in this case it's cloth with pearls, that a knight would wear somewhere while he would go out to joust, and this would be indicative of his devotion, usually romantic devotion to that particular lady. Now, this suits Lancelot's purposes very well, for Lancelot is known to never wear the favors of any lady, because of course he actually loves Guinevere, who, as the king, or as the wife of the king, right, he cannot acknowledge publicly to love. However, by wearing Elaine's favor, right, it will cast suspicion away from people believing that the knight who he is pretending to be is actually himself, indeed. And for Elaine, of course, though, this is going to lead her to hope for the love of Lancelot. And so we move into the description of the joust, right? We have Arthur up watching this. He's cloaked. This is around line 432, and all of these symbols of the dragon, right? We see that they found the clear-faced king who sat robed in red samite, easily to be known, since to his crown the golden dragon clung, and down his robe the dragon writhed in gold. And from the carven work behind him crept 2 dragons gilded, sloping down to make arms for his chair, while all the rest of them, through knots and loops and folds innumerable, fled ever through the woodwork, till they found the new design wherein they lost themselves. Yet with all ease so tender was the work, and in the costly canopy over him set, blazed the last diamond of the nameless king. So, again, remember the symbolism of the dragon, but note this idea that even the very chair is in the symbol of the dragon. So he's tamed it, right? It's underneath him. He's tamped it down. But if you remember, this kind of control, right, is difficult to hold in. This tamping down of these chaos, these chaotic kind of elements, and we're going to see things start to break apart. And the focal point of this break, in many ways, is going to be the relationship between Lancelot and Guinevere. All right, so as the tournament, the joust tournament starts, we see that Lancelot waits. He waits to join the weaker side, so that he can fight against the stronger, because he is the greatest knight. And at lines 468 to 474, we see this kind of response, like, oh, surely that can't be Lancelot. It seems like it is, because people are recognizing his style of jousting, and also he's better than everyone else. So who could this be but Lancelot? People are saying, well, surely it cannot be, for he has never worn the favor of any lady, and yet this knight is wearing some lady's favor. And being in disguise, he's set upon by what are actually his own relatives, his own kin, and he's grievously wounded, and he cries out at line 504 that my prize is death, right? So he's not actually going to be able to even stand to accept the prize at this point. We see more specifically at lines 509 to 516 that Lancelot has been pierced by a lance, and he's grievously wounded, and he's taken off to a hermitage in the woods where he can secretly recover, or hopefully anyway. The outcome of all of this ultimately is a conversation between the Queen and Arthur. The Queen confesses to Arthur that she knew that Lancelot was going to ride disguise. Of course, she doesn't tell him that it was her idea. And the king notes that, he notes that this was rather discourteous of Lancelot to have lied to his king. Arthur would have, of course, also kept the secret rather than just Guinevere. The king then also notes, because if you will note in the text that Guinevere is not there, she doesn't actually see the joust, so the king tells her that Lancelot rode with the favor of a lady. And we see this response from the queen at about line 603 or so. In response to being told this, she says, "Yea, Lord," she said, "thy hopes are mine." And saying that, she choked and sharply turned about to hide her face, passed to her chamber, and there flung herself down on the great king's couch, and writhed upon it, and clenched her fingers till they bit the palm, and shrieked out, "Traitor," to the unhearing wall, and flashed into wild tears, and rose again, and moved about her palace, proud and pale. So there's a sense of her writhing in pain at this seeming betrayal. And of course, one can obviously perceive the certain irony in this, right? The wife and queen betraying her husband and temporal lord, the king, with Lancelot, and yet seeing Lancelot as a traitor. But you have to remember that Lancelot has pledged himself in devotion to her alone. Now, of course, we, the reader, know that he hasn't truly been unfaithful to Gawain, or to Guinevere, if we can put it in those terms. But the queen, of course, believes that this is a real token of love that he was wearing. So, speaking of Gawain, at line 635 or so, right, we see that, so he's sent out to try and find Lancelot. And there's this idea that this line describing his courtesy as with a touch of traitor in it, how loyal is he to Lancelot at this point? But ultimately, Gawain discovers Lancelot's shield, and so he discovers the identity of the knight, of course. And this relates to Elaine. So from around lines 724 to 739, we come to see that all come to hear of the maid's love, the maid Elaine, even if not everyone knows who that is, knows who she is, but they know that a maid loves Lancelot, and so there's this sense that people are toasting the love of the maid and Lancelot, and we see the Queen's response to this quite dramatically. Let's see, this is at about let's see, line 732 or so. So, right, so ran the tale of this love, like fire about the court. Fire and dry stubble a 9 days' wander flared, till even the knights at a banquet twice or thrice forgot to drink to Lancelot and the Queen. So it's interesting they used to even openly drink to Lancelot and the Queen. And pledging Lancelot and the lily maid, that is Elaine, smiled at each other, while the Queen, who sat with lips severely placid, felt the knot climb in her throat, and with her feet unseen crushed the wild passion out against the floor beneath the banquet, where meats become as wormwood, and she hated all who pledged. So there's this bitterness growing in the Queen, and this growing talk of the love for the maid and Lancelot. Meanwhile, if we skip a little bit ahead, we see at line 786 to 810 that Elaine has found Lancelot, where he's in this hermitage, and she's nursing him back to health. But we see that his vision is still fixed on Guinevere. And explicitly at line 877, we have this description, right, that full often the bright image of one face, right, comes before him. That's one face, of course, is Guinevere. And then finally, this all comes to a head at about lines 904 to 955. Right? Elaine adorns herself, all right, in her best clothes, and she proclaims her desire to be married to Lancelot, or even she says that she'll just follow him wherever he goes, as in his wanderings throughout the world, lest she die. Right? She's really putting this into terms of like she's going to die for love of him if he doesn't accept her. However, all that Lancelot is able to promise her is to give her future husband, if she should marry a poor man, money and lands that are in his disposal. This, to say the least, is not what she wants. And really, even her family is on Lancelot's side and trying to discourage this. Elaine's father suggests to Lancelot that he's too courteous, right? That this is what is causing her to fall in love with him, and suggests that he should be discourteous to her to try and break her passionate love that she feels for him. However, it is not working. At line 988, right, Elaine is pining away. She sings this song of life and death. And then at lines 1012 to 1019, we see her crying out like a banshee, right? Let me die, let me die. This is obviously causing great distress to her family. At line 1065, her brother Tor threatens to strike Lancelot dead for this action. And ultimately, they even try to change her feelings for the knight Lancelot by telling her about the relationship with Guinevere. So in response to Elaine referring to him as the highest, her father says, highest? The father answered, echoing highest. He meant to break the passion in her. Nay, daughter, I know not what you call the highest. But this I know, for all the people know it. He loves the queen, and in an open shame, and she returns his love in open shame. If this be high, what is it to be low? However, Elaine really seems to consider these to be slanders, right? And against Lancelot. She won't hear them. And instead desires to be shriven, that is to be have a priest hear a confession and be absolved so that she can die. She answers her father, Sweet father, all too faint and sick am I for anger. These are slanders. Never yet was noble man, but made ignoble talk. He makes no friend who never made a foe, but now it is my glory to have loved one peerless without stain. So let me pass, my father, howsoever I seem to you. Not all unhappy, having loved God's best and greatest, though my love had no return. Yet seeing you desire, child, to live, thanks, but you work against your own desire. For if I could believe the things you say, I should but die the sooner. Wherefore cease, sweet father, and bid call the ghostly man, that's the priest, hither, and let me shrive me clean and die. Right? She just wants to confess and then die. So there's a sense that all of these attempts to try and bring her back to some sense of sanity are overcome by her great grief at this unrequited love. So we see this finally come to a conclusion at lines 1096 to 1129. It says that, so when the ghostly man had come and gone, she, with a face bright as for sin forgiven, besought Lavaine to write as she devised a letter, word for word. And when he asked, is it for Lancelot? Is it for my dear lord? Then will I bear it gladly, she replied, for Lancelot and the Queen, and all the world, but I myself must bear it. Then he wrote the letter she devised, which being writ and folded. O sweet father, tender and true, deny me not, she said. Ye never yet denied my fancies. This, however strange, my latest, lay the letter in my hand, a little ere I die, and close the hand upon it. I shall guard it even in death. When the heat is gone from out my heart, then take the little bed on which I died, for Lancelot's love, and deck it like the Queen's, for richness, and me also like the Queen, in all I have of rich, and lay me on it, and let there be prepared a chariot bier, to take me to the river, and a barge be ready on the river, clothed in black. I go in state to court to meet the Queen. Then there surely I shall speak for mine own self, and none of you can speak for me so well. Therefore let our dumb old man alone go with me. He can steer and row, and he will guide me to that palace, to the doors. So basically, she wants her father to promise that he will lay the letter to Lancelot and the Queen in her hands after her death, as she's laid out on this bier, which will be put on a barge, and then sailed down the Thames to the Queen. She ceased, her father promised, whereupon she grew so cheerful that they deemed her death was rather in the fantasy than the blood. But 10 slow mornings passed, and on the 11th her father laid the letter in her hand, and closed the hand upon it, and she died. So that day there was dole in Astolat. There's this grief, this dole, this sadness at the death of Elaine. And being dead, we see at lines 1130 to 1154, she is indeed placed on the bier and floated down the Thames. Now, meanwhile, while this sad sight is all happening, Lancelot is attempting to present the diamonds to the Queen. And so we see, this is at line 1170, all in an oriel on the summer side, vine-clad of Arthur's palace toward the stream, they met. And that's Lancelot and the Queen. And Lancelot kneeling uttered, Queen, lady, my liege, in whom I have my joy, take what I had not won except for you, these jewels, and make me happy, making them an armlet for the roundest arm on earth, or necklace for a neck to which the swans is tawnier than her signets. These are words. Your beauty is your beauty, and I sin in speaking. Yet, so it's interesting, Lancelot notes the sin here, but he goes on, yet, O grant my worship of it, words, as we grant grief tears, such sin in words, perchance, we both can pardon. But my Queen, I hear of rumors flying through your court. Our bond, as not the bond of man and wife, should have in it an absoluter trust, to make up that defect. Let rumors be, when did not rumors fly? These, as I trust, that you trust me in your nobleness, I may not well believe that you believe. However, we see how the Queen is going to respond to this outpouring of word. He even puts it in terms of worship, right? It's almost like a religious kind of experience that he's having with her. Well, thus he spoke, half turned away the Queen, brake from the vast oriel embowering vine, leaf after leaf, and tore and cast them off, till all the place whereon she stood was green. Then when he ceased, in one cold passive hand received at once, and laid aside the gems there on a table near her, and replied, It may be I am quicker of belief than you believe, Lancelot of the Lake. Our bond is not the bond of man and wife. This good is in it, whatsoe'er of ill, it can be broken easier. I for you this many a year have done despite and wrong to one whom ever in my heart of hearts I did acknowledge nobler. She acknowledges that Arthur is nobler than Lancelot. What are these? Diamonds for me? They had been thrice their worth, being your gift, had you not lost your own. To loyal hearts the value of all gifts must vary as the giver's. Not for me. For her, for your new fancy. Only this grant me, I pray you, have your joys apart. I doubt not that however changed you keep so much of what is graceful. And myself would shun to break these bonds of courtesy in which, as Arthur's Queen, I move and rule. So cannot speak my mind, and end to this a strange one, yet I take it with amen. So pray you add my diamonds to her pearl, pearls. Deck her with these. Tell her she shines me down. An armlet for an arm to which the queen's is haggard, or a necklace for a neck. Oh, as much fairer as a faith once fair, was richer than these diamonds. Hers, not mine. Nay, by the mother of our Lord himself, or hers or mine now to work my will, she shall not have them. Remember, she doesn't know Elaine is dead. She doesn't even know who the maid who loves Lancelot is, in fact. So, saying which, she seized, and through the casement standing wide for heat, flung them, and down they flashed, and smote the stream. Then from the smitten surface flashed, as it were, diamonds to meet them, and they passed away. And while Sir Lancelot leant in half disdain at love, life, all things, on the window ledge, close underneath his eyes, and right across, where these had fallen, slowly past the barge, whereon the lily maid of Astolat lay smiling like a star in blackest night. So, in response to this presentation of the diamonds, Guinevere casts them into the Thames, and Lancelot, looking over at them, sees the barge float down with the body of Elaine in it. And so it comes down the Thames. The knights of Arthur take up Elaine's body, and as they're taking it up, the queen espies a letter in her hand. And so at 1264 to 1275, we have the letter. It reads, Most noble lord Sir Lancelot of the Lake, I sometime called the maid of Astolat. Come, for you left me, taking no farewell. Hither to take my last farewell of you. I loved you, and my love had no return, and therefore my true love has been my death. And therefore to our Lady Guinevere, and to all ladies I make moan. Pray for my soul, and yield me burial. Pray for my soul, thou too, Sir Lancelot, as thou art a knight peerless. So she basically tells of her unrequited love for Lancelot, and bids the queen and Lancelot together, interestingly, pray for her soul. And as we see, after that, all who hear the letter are weeping. At lines 1281 to 1298, Lancelot expresses his grief for her death, and really he claims that she loved him out of measure. He says, My lord liege Arthur, and all ye that hear, know that for this most gentle maiden's death right heavy am I, for good she was and true, but loved me with a love beyond all love in women, whomsoever I have known. Yet to be loved makes not to love again, not at my years, however it hold in youth. I swear by truth and knighthood that I gave no cause, not willingly, for such a love. To this I call my friends in testimony. Her brethren and her father, who himself besought me to be plain and blunt, and used to break her passion some discourtesy against my nature. What I could, I did. I left her and bade her no farewell, though had I dreamt the damsel would have died, I might have put my wits to some rough use and helped her from herself. Right? So there's a sense in which he's expressing his grief, but he's trying to indicate that he tried to avoid this. But the queen's response is this. It says, sea was her wrath, yet working after the storm, she says, ye might at least have done her so much grace, fair lord, as would have helped her from her death. Right? So she too is blaming him. And Lancelot responds that, she had proclaimed that she would marry him, and that he could not do. That he, claimed he would help her future husband with riches and lands. That's all he could offer her. And so, at line 315, Arthur answers to Lancelot, saying, O my knight, it will be to thy worship as my knight, and mine as head of all our table round, to see that she be buried worshipfully. So he tasks Lancelot with burying her. And following this, we see that Elaine is buried like a queen. And following this, we get the kind of conclusion to the situation with Lancelot and the queen. The queen says to Lancelot, Forgive me, mine was jealousy and love. He answered with his eyes upon the ground, That is love's curse. Pass on, my queen, forgiven. Right, so there's this sense that again, there's this curse of love that's laid upon them. But we see after this that Arthur himself says, Lancelot, my Lancelot, thou in whom I have most joy and most affiance. Affiance is faith. So Arthur still has faith in Lancelot. And he really follows along this by saying that he should have just married Elaine. Right? He doesn't understand why Lancelot will not be bound by marriage. Lancelot claims that free love will not be bound, but Arthur responds, but free love so bound were freest. And so the story concludes with the following fate for Lancelot. Right, he goes out running into the brooks, sat by a river in a cove, and watched the high reed wave, and lifted up his eyes, and saw the barge that brought her moving down, far off, a blot upon the stream, and said low in himself, a simple heart and sweet. You love me, damsel, surely with a love far tenderer than my queen's. Right, so he even notes that the love for her in many ways was at least better in the sense of it was tenderer. It was more innocent than the queen's. Pray for thy soul? That will I. Farewell too now at last, farewell, fair Lily. Jealousy and love, not rather dead love's harsh air. Jealous pride? Queen, if I grant the jealousy as of love, may not your crescent fear for name and fame speak as it waxes of a love that wanes? Why did the king dwell on my name to me? Mine own name shames me, seeming a reproach. Lancelot, whom the lady of the lake caught from his mother's arms, the wondrous one who passes through the vision of the night. She chanted snatches of mysterious hymns, heard on the winding waters even morn. She kissed me, saying, Thou art fair, my child, as a king's son. And often in her arms she bare me, pacing on the dusky mere. Would she had drowned me in it, where'er it be. Right. So remember that the symbol of the Lady of the Lake could very well be the church. So there's this sense that he recognizes that this, right, that in which he has been brought up, he is betraying, right, all the codes of honor and chivalry and morality and ethics. Right, and he's ashamed and reproached to his own self. For what am I? What profits me my name of greatest knight? I fought for it and have it. Pleasure to have it, none. To lose it, pain. Now grown a part of me, but what use in it? To make men worse by making my sin known? Or sin seem less, the sinner seeming great? Alas for Arthur's greatest knight, a man not after Arthur's heart. Right, so again, alas for Arthur's greatest knight. He may be his greatest knight, but he is not after the heart of Arthur. He's not the same kind of hero, if we can even call him that. I needs must break these bonds that so defame me. Not without she wills it. Would I, if she willed it? Nay, who knows? But I would not. Then may God, I pray him, send a sudden angel down to seize me by the hair and bear me far, and fling me deep in that forgotten mere, among the tumbled fragments of the hills. So we really see this kind of conclusion at the end of the story, Lancelot feeling the full burden of what he has done, and what he indeed is still doing and continues to do. And so the story ends. So groaned Sir Lancelot in remorseful pain, now knowing he should die a holy man. So there's a sense in which this is a very confusing ending. What is this line about dying a holy man? What does that mean? Well, this is a reference already by Tennyson, who is, remember, participating in a larger tradition, which goes back centuries to well-known other versions of the story, but stories that have the same ending, namely that Lancelot ultimately ends up in a monastery, in a hermitage, living like a holy hermit, and repenting of the sins that he's committed. And so we get this kind of glimpse of the fate of Lancelot. And it's interesting because we see throughout this juxtaposition, there's a sense perhaps in which Lancelot could be seen to represent very much a kind of secular hero, right? Or a classical, even pre-Christian or pagan hero. He has incredible strength, right? He's victorious in all the battles that he's in, it seems. And indeed, even from a certain point of view, he lives up to the code of the knight. However, there is, of course, this sense in which he cannot compare to the kind of heroism, the kind of kingship that we have in Arthur, right, which is above these kinds of sordid things and is seen as this holy image of right, his kingdom of Camelot that he's trying to forge with his knights, and forge with expectations which Guinevere claims are in fact impossible. So as we continue to look at further idols and the idols of the king, we are going to see that these forces that are bubbling under the surface, right, between conflicting loyalties and lack of virtue in certain heroes, which ought to be held to a higher standard, is going to ultimately undermine, in many ways, the very foundations of Camelot.